If you have guitars in your song, then your guitar tone likely plays a huge role in how professional your final mix is going to sound. I've been recording guitars for nearly 15 years and I've learned a lot in the process. In this video, I'm going to share with you my biggest do's and don'ts for getting the best guitar tones possible right inside GarageBand. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Band Guide, where we use GarageBand to create professional sounding music. I'm your band guy, Colin, and if you're serious about creating professional sounding music in GarageBand, I want to give you something to help with that. Getting the right tones when you're recording is an essential step in creating a professional sounding mix, but then you actually have to mix it. And I've put together a 6-step checklist to a professional mix in GarageBand that just walks through the 6 steps that all professional mixes have and how you can do them inside GarageBand. It's completely free from the link in the description below, so be sure to grab that. And let's go ahead and dive into some guitar tone do's and don'ts. Don't number 1. Don't just record your parts and then find the tone later. One of the most amazing things about modern recording and GarageBand specifically is that we can tweak all the settings and perfect them after the fact. One of the worst things about modern recording and GarageBand specifically is that we can continue to tweak all the settings and perfect them after the fact. The problem is that this leads with always feeling like I'll just keep tweaking it. I'll just find the perfect tone. I'll just keep messing with it until it's perfect. Eventually, we start to change things and we like them better in the moment because they're just new and different, but they might not actually be better. We might not even like them more. They're just different than what we just had before. So this is a real problem because if you just keep tweaking, you'll eventually settle on something, but you might not settle on what actually sounds best. It just sounds different in that moment, and that's exciting for you, which ultimately sometimes is going to end up with subpar tones. And that brings me to do number 1, get your tone before you record. Getting your tone before you record allows us to do a few different things. First and foremost is that some amps and some tones react differently to the way that we play the guitar. And if we have settled on the final tone, then we can really play the guitar into the tone that we know we're going to be using, or we're pretty sure we're going to be using, and get the best take and the best tone, both in how we play it and how we play it into the sound that we're recording. It will also help give us kind of that experience, that vibe of the recording, of the song itself. If you've really kind of figured out the tone that you think you want for this song, then you get to play into it a little bit more. It's a subtle improvement, but all these little subtle improvements add up to a more confident, professional sounding mix. It also helps you decide what you might need to layer in for your song to sound the way you want it to. If you're recording with your final tones or close to your final tones, then you know, well, maybe this part needs one more guitar part to really sound full. Or maybe this section actually doesn't need that other guitar part I thought it needed because these guitars already sound awesome. The best way to get your tones before you start recording is what I like to call tone sessions. This is basically just a recording session, but the goal is to not create something that you're going to release. You don't want to be planning to release this because when we're planning to release, we get all these nerves, right? We get all this anxiety about this has to be perfect, this has to be exactly what I want it to be, and that actually gets in the way of what we're doing. What you want to do is just create a situation where you're just playing parts of the song and you're just really listening, do I like this, do I not like this? And you're just coming up with the tones that you think sound best in that moment, devoid of the pressure and the anxiety of, I'm going to be recording this. This has to be exactly right. You're just focusing on getting a tone that you think is great for the part that you're playing. This is where I would use that 5-step process that I talked about in the last video to get the best tone possible with the GarageBand Amp Designer. I'll link to that video up here. And I would just pull it up, I'd play around, I'd find some tones that I like, and then I would save them as a preset. That way, when I do go to do final recordings, I've already made presets of tones that I know that I like with my configuration that work with the style of music that I play. And then I can pull those up, pull them up as any other preset, and I'm working with tones that are optimally suited for my recording setup for the music that I'm making, and it's super easy. And that all brings me to don't number 2, don't use the exact same tone for everything. This is particularly important for rhythm parts, but it goes for leads and any other parts as well. If you use the exact same tones for everything, then things kind of just start to blend together because there's not a lot of separation. And that brings me to do number 2, create variations between your guitar tones. This could be anything from small changes like just switching the pickup on your guitar or changing out the mic on the guitar amp or changing out the cabinet, all the way up to larger changes like completely changing out the amp altogether, or completely changing out your guitar altogether. You want to find complementary tones, but having a little bit of variation between your tones allows for more separation between parts, more separation between tracks, even two rhythm tracks that are doing identical things. If you have slight variation in your recording configuration, you're going to get more separation, clarity, and width in your mixes. An amazing thing about using GarageBand Amp Designer is that in the left ear, I could have a Fender style amp, and in the right ear, I could have a Vox style amp. I can change out my amps, and I don't have to own either of those amps to be able to do that. So you have a lot of flexibility, and just that little change, if you can find complementary tones in your settings where they both sound similar but still distinctly different, you're going to get that separation in your mix. It will help subtly, but it adds up to be tremendous. And finally, don't number 3, and this is a big one, don't use so much overdrive and distortion. Overdrive and distortion is great. If you've been watching this channel, you know I love overdrive and distortion. It helps add harmonic content and fullness to things. But if you overdo it, especially on guitars, then you start to lose clarity and dynamic range in the sources. So you lose a little bit of the punchiness from the guitar. You lose a little bit of the clarity that you get from each individual note and a chord, for example. Everything starts to blend together a little bit too much. Now, there's some genres where this is par for the course, and that's fine. But for most genres, you want a lot less distortion or overdrive than you think you need. And that brings me to, surprisingly, do number 3, which is use less distortion than you think you need. Go back and listen to some of your favorite bands or references for the kind of music that you're creating, and pay attention to how much actual distortion they have on their guitars. Now, one of my favorite examples of this is AC/DC. We think of AC/DC as being this huge, big rock band that has turn up to the 11 guitars, but they do with way less distortion than we think they do. I imagine anytime I think of AC/DC, I think of them as being really overdriven, but the reality is their guitars are barely overdriven. They have a little bit of drive in them, helps bring out the tone, but they don't go crazy with it, and that lets their song sound really clear and full, but without being overdone. That being said, distortion is a tool, and it can do some really cool things, and it can take a single note and make it sound huge. And that brings me to a bonus do, a do 3.5 if you will. Save heavy distortion for specific parts. This could be anything from lead parts to going crazy with fuzz parts. And I like to bring these in and use them really intentionally at different points so that those can really be full and take up a lot of space in the mix, or really stand out in the mix, or cut through better in the mix, without overwhelming everything. So my general tones usually have just a little bit of drive. I do as little as I can get by with that still sounds full, right? So I don't shy away from distortion on my guitars. I'm not saying that, but do a little bit less. And then when it's time in the song, when it makes sense, highlight parts of the song, bring in more body in parts of the song with more drive. So a great example of this, one of my favorite ways to do it is like a crazy fuzz tone that comes in at specific points in the song. Sometimes I'll save it to the last chorus, sometimes even the repeat of the last chorus, and I'll do single note fuzz guitar parts. And that really helps me have a clear sonic part, a lot of separation from everything else going on, but add a lot of fullness. When you have an overly fuzzed guitar part, you don't need to play a full chord to necessarily get a big sound. And so you'd have a single note fuzz part that comes in at different points in the song and adds a lot of body without blurring together and kind of clouding the rest of the mix. All right, I could talk guitar tones all day, so I'm going to cut myself off. But now I want to hear from you. What is your favorite tip or trick for getting the best guitar tones possible? Let me know in the comments. And if you don't already have it, be sure to grab my 6-step checklist to a pro mix in GarageBand. As I said, getting the right tones is one piece of it, but then you have to go and mix it, and that's a whole nother animal. So I've put together this 6-step checklist. It's completely free from the link in the description below. It really help you get a better mix inside GarageBand completely free. And if this video is helpful for you, be sure to subscribe, and I'll be back next week with another video.
One thing at a time, I can